What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I am showing you the making of a proper lo-fi hip-hop beat on the Electribe 2, the synth version. I'm going to be making full use of the grooves feature to really get into that drunken drummer pocket, as well as take full advantage of the kind of lo-fi character of the Electribe and some of its more organic sounds. Let's start this off by playing a more full version of the beat that you heard in the intro. So let's jump into the individual elements, starting off with the drums. So I've got the same kick duplicated twice. This is the oscillator low knock. Here's it without processing. Already a lovely sample. All the samples are just built into the Electribe. And then for the effects, I've got overdrive on here. Exact same processing here. These samples are basically identical. The reason I have them on two separate tracks is grooves, because one of the big things I wanted to get here is a really organic drunken drummer swung groove. And that means I'm using grooves to do that, because you can't just record into this thing unquantized, but you can nudge stuff forwards and backwards and alter basically the grid that the nodes are quantized to. And in this case, I want the first kick that intros the beat to be dead on that first beat, not shifted forwards or backwards or anything like that. So this one, just locked to the normal grid as you would expect. This one is playing that secondary kick, so let me mute all this stuff. So that's this one. That's this one. Let's go shift, cycle through until I get to grooves. I know there is a faster way to do this, but I like this because it requires basically no memorization. In this case, I've got rush beat, which shifts everything backward in time, so it hits a little sooner. Just to show you the groove depth here, it's up a bit of the way. It's fairly subtle. It's a bit more extreme on the snare, where it's 100 out of 127. This snare is shifted to be quite a bit ahead of the beat. Not so much that it feels disjointed, like it's hitting too early, but just enough to where it's decently ahead of the beat, you know, very much in the drunken drummer style. Let me play that without this hi-hat. So this hi-hat right here, let me show you which sample that is. This hi-hat is right on the grid, just playing 4 on the floor. And so if you hear this referenced, that's basically what I'm going for. It's like a flam between these two elements with this hitting earlier. This other hi-hat is doing the opposite. I've showed this in a previous video. The groove type is laid back, so it's getting shifted ahead. So this is a little bit late, the snare is a little bit early, and that is really the foundation of the drunken drummer groove, or at least this take on it. And real quick, let me show you the samples I'm using. This is Hoppy, no processing whatsoever. And then this is a severely shortened sample with a little bit of overdrive on it. I'm using the decay and release here. East close. That's it for the drums. If I were to export these WAV files and do a bit of mixing, I would probably compress these fairly heavily, maybe add a little bit more overdrive or saturation or something like that, possibly make them sound a little more lo-fi using some other processing. But let's move on to the more harmonic elements. So this element is one of the instrument oscillators, so it's really just a sample. This is an electric piano. It's a nice sample. In this case, I'm using the chord mode, I think with whatever the default chord rank is. And then I've got one of my favorite effects built into this thing, Phaser LFO1. Except that's an octave down. So that's hitting way down here. So it's got that organic, borderline jazzy character to it because of the electric piano, but then the phaser adds kind of a futuristic element, which I really like. Really brings out the lo-fi hip-hop aesthetic. I think this is the chord that I played. And I should note that in the cases of pretty much all of this, I just played stuff in live. I rarely use Sequencer to program stuff from scratch unless it's something really simple like an offbeat hi-hat or something 4 on the floor. In this case, I just played this in live, and then if I make a mistake, I'll either use the sequencer to erase the mistake and re-record it, or I will just start over entirely. Let's talk about the bass. So the oscillator for this is just a sine wave, but obviously it's had some stuff done to it to make it really work. Here's the sine wave by itself. So I've got oscillator edit turned up a little bit. Here's a pure sine wave. It's a sine wave with some modulation. That's what's living in this oscillator. So I've got it turned up a bit for a little extra like saturation. And then I've got the distortion effect on here for a lot of extra saturation. So you can hear all the harmonics that this adds. This is a pretty standard kind of old school or lo-fi hip hop bass patch. It's really quite simple to actually sound design, and of course you can tweak it to be as distorted or kind of pushed into the background as you want it to be. It's got a good amount of low end, some good harmonics, and the interest in it really comes from the part being played, and that's where a lot of kind of the attitude comes from. So let me play the drums and the bass together. So it jumps up an octave. I've got these little octave jumps and these little staccato parts. I should also note that the groove on this is not set, so no notes will bleed into each other. And I should also note that there's no groove depth on here, so this is just completely locked to the grid. Once again, creating kind of a rub with the drums. So the drums are super swung, this is super straight ahead. And I've got these octave jumps and these staccato notes in here, which adds a lot of interest to a bass line that at the end of the day is really just following the chord progression. This is a very common technique that you'll hear in old school and lo-fi hip hop with these octave jumps, these staccato notes mixed in with these super long, deep notes. Works out really nicely. So let's talk about this part next. This is a Kalimba sample. It's a really nice sample. So it's playing a super simple part. No processing or anything like that. But once again, I've got laid back here, and it's up a decent amount, close to halfway. That bounces off what the drums are doing really nicely. So the hi-hats are laid back, the snare and the kicks are a little ahead. So it creates this little skipping effect right around there that I absolutely love. Kind of an important part of lo-fi hip-hop. And it also kind of bounces harmonically off the bass line, which I really like. I kept it very simple. The chords kind of help reharmonize it, and then it does that octave jump halfway through the pattern. The other thing I've done here is I've set my master effects to a limiter, and then set the master effects to hold. So I could just choose a sweet spot here on the Chaos pad and then send everything to the master effects. And the idea is that it'll even everything out a little bit and hopefully cause the kick to pump everything just a little bit, since I'm often using up my effects slots on things like distortion and saturation and phasers. And so if I was to bring these wave files that this thing can export into post, I would actually sidechain all the instruments to the kick and possibly even to the snare as well. I should also mention that if I wanted to build even further, I would probably bring in some kind of pad, kind of push it into the background. So this is a super saw patch. Get some filter movement in there. Probably mess around with the effects a bit, and then in post push it way into the background just to fill everything out, add a bit of ambience. If you would like to see me make more lo-fi hip-hop, this time with a little bit of a synthwave influence on the Electribe, you can click or tap up over here. And if you'd like to see me make lo-fi hip-hop on a different device, you can click or tap down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.